I hope everybody's okay with that. So before we start, everybody, thanks so much for joining. I'm sure other people will be joining as we are progressing through this panel. I'd like to just hand over to my colleague Karen Cohen from Live, just to give you a quick orientation of the environment we're in. So Karen, take it away.
Great. So on your browser, you'll see the map here, and it's easy to move around the room. We're going to stay in this room for a while, but later on, you'll be able to move into some of the speaker rooms. And to move, you just click either where you want to go or the name of the room. And you'll get a pop-up that says to leave the Zoom meeting you're in, and to join the other one, just hit yes, and you are magically transported to another conversation in another room. And you can see who's in each room by looking at the side. So you can see we're all on the main stage now.
That's great. So thanks, Karen. We would really encourage you to really explore the platform we're on. The way we see this going is I'm going to hand over to our panel chair, who's now with us. Thanks, Goran. In a moment or two, we'll have about a 30-minute conversation. And of course, we're very happy to take some questions while all the panel is together. You can either put your questions in the chat and I'll try to feed them into the conversation, or indeed we can just open it out and you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. We can have that, but we would really encourage you, because our panelists have very generously agreed to give us a bit of extra time at the end of the panel. If you wanted more of a one-to-one or smaller group conversations with Ian, with Hemini, with Dom, with Goran, you could even come and have a chat with me if you're at a loss. That would be great. Explore the platform we've got here. That would be great. So just before I hand over to Goran, maybe just a brief scene setting. So at the beginning of the year, Greening of Streaming announced its low energy sustainable streaming accord, or less accord, essentially an 18-month industry-wide consultation initiative to address, indeed, challenge the accepted quality paradigm. Yes, Goran, I have stolen that from your article on this subject, that phrase, with a minimum default quality whereby encoding is energy optimized rather than quality optimized. So in an industry where quality has been such a focus for many, this initiative could be considered rather ambitious, courageous, potentially divisive, where the opinions and interests of various factions or stakeholders are involved. So perhaps that's our starting point. And on that bombshell, as it were, I'm going to hand over to Goran to take it away. Goran.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for that quite nice intro. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and being here wherever you're watching from. If you're here to hear about sustainability and how it might impact video quality, like Neil says, then you're in the right place. I'm Goran Nastic, the editor of CSI Magazine. We cover broadcast and streaming technology and trends globally. And I'm joined by a panel of experts who I know at least a couple of them won't be shy in sharing their views. So it should make for a nice conversation. Starting off with me is Hemini Mehta, and she is sustainability lead at the EBU. Interestingly, the EBU actually started its sustainability journey, I'm told, in 2020 during the first lockdowns. So that's kind of a nice parallel, because it was a time when people said, it was good for the environment because we couldn't travel and all the rest of it. We also have Ian Nock, who is a media consultant at Fairmile West. He's also a member of he works for the UHD forum as well. And, some of the facts and stats might be from the forum, but I know all opinions are pretty much Ian's own personal ones. So for any lawyers watching, just bear that in mind. And then finally, we have Dom Robinson, who he is the founder of a video software company called Ideas. But more recently and more importantly, he also founded the Greening of Streaming, which kind of does what it says on the tin and also has a no greenwashing slogan, which I think is quite nice. And Dom is one of the key instigators, if not the key instigator of the Lesser Code, together with many of the group's members, especially the encoding vendors. But I'll let Dom kind of explain that in more detail before we move on. So Dom, the stage is yours for a few minutes.
Do you want a little intro then? Can I share a screen? I think it's probably, I've got some slides which might make it a little bit easier for me to not go off on one.
You can.
Let's put those together. There we go. Cool. Right. So just a quick sort of summary of a little bit of background and a summary of Greening and Streaming. So Greening and Streaming is a members association. That's our membership at the moment. That's our current slide. We've got some base principles. We are focused. We have a single main rule, which is no greenwashing, which was put together as a sort of tongue-in-cheek idea right at the beginning and has become the soul of the whole entity. And it's created a really collaborative mindset within the community. It's member-led, not-for-profit. It's a user group, not a standards organization. So we're not trying to develop standards and so on. So don't get confused with what we're doing with the Lesser Code. We're not trying to dictate anything. We're trying to extract that from the industry. So we are focused on making real change through education and engineering. We don't talk about carbon a great deal. Happy to talk about that fact, but we don't talk about it a great deal. Can't find many streaming engineers who know what carbon is. So we focus on operational energy. We have members who are sort of chip and appliance vendors who keep our ears and eyes on embedded emissions and physical infrastructure growth and so on and so forth. But what we can actually do something about is operational energy. We are very focused on thinking systemically. So we're trying to not let a vendor in an encoding environment do something which then makes 30 million set-top boxes have to work a bit harder without realizing it. So we're keen to take a systemic view. And we have a mantra, which is you can't win sustainability. So it's not a competitive thing. You can only win if we all win this one together. Organised into 8 working groups. I won't go through all the words in my slides because it's probably going to go on too long if I do. There's lots of activity and lots of directions. And as I sort of really took the helm in the autumn last year, I wanted to create an overarching storyline so everything had a bit of alignment, so we could actually, rather than just snail off and measure everything, we could do something practical. We're engineers, we like doing stuff. So just before we go into that, what's the sort of problem space? There's a lot of data. We don't produce a lot of data. We don't publish a lot of data. We're producing an insane amount of data at the moment, but we're working with academia to interpret that rather than publish it ourselves, so we don't fall foul of our own no greenwashing rule. But just to talk at a very high level about what the problem space is, if you take some of the most conservative figures, which are the IEAs, got around 2% of global final electricity supplies used by data centers, about 3% by telecoms. Cisco estimate figures vary, 70 to 80% of network traffic is video. So order of magnitude, streaming is probably driving demand for infrastructure that consumes 2.5 to 3% of global final energy supply. That is as back of a fag packet as I think it should be at the moment. There's a long way we have to go before we have real measurement that can really feed any estimates. However, even in order of magnitude, it's significant enough to really try to become more efficient. I think aspirationally, greening and streaming might take 1% of world energy out of circulation, which would be kind of cool thing to do, but might be a bit ambitious. Who knows? An interesting and key discovery, which I think is worth throwing out for discussion later. We see a lot of ESG accounting already talking about digital services and measuring them in gigabytes and equating that to carbon. You can't, you shouldn't, it's wrong. I quite feel increasingly strong about that every time I talk about this issue, and I'm happy to go into the why of that later. Specifically, the Lesser Code is exploring an idea where we have for a long time as an industry pursued quality. We always push the Ks, the gigabits, the Gs up as a way of upselling our technology. So quality can be, quality of service as much as it can be quality of viewing experience and so on. So quality is a broadly used term in this sector. But often we're at a point where you can't perceive those differences. You need a VMAF analysis tool to tell you what resolution of screen you're watching, or you need to monitor the bandwidth to know that you're getting a quality of service guarantee from your ISP and so on. So we're in a space of massive overselling. The question is, what if we approach that as engineers in a different way? And we set a default as an industry that was naturally going to be as energy efficient as possible through the ecosystem. And we start every channel hopping system there. We push that out for the passive viewer, putting the kitchen on in the TV. Sorry, the TV on in the kitchen. There we go. You can put whatever you want on anywhere, but you get the idea. So essentially we wanted to give engineers permission to look at degrowth and focusing instead of on quality, actually finding a good enough level, and whether at that good enough level we could achieve some significant engineering savings. It's provoked an enormous amount of discussion, and that's a good thing. That's what we're trying to do. We're asking questions like, what would that look like? So every stakeholder, the DTG has a different view from the IAB. You know, there's all sorts of different interests here, and we're trying to harvest all of them. If we put that out there, could it, what difference could it really make? Can we actually measure that? And that's a very key part of what Greening and Streaming's members are offering to do, is to actually get together over this summer, design some tests, and then over Christmas and New Year, run those tests in anger and really get some real user measurement in the real world to see if any of these ideas are sticky and viable. So happy to go into all the detail about the timing and plan of that. But if you're interested, go to Greening and Streaming. If I go to the end, greeningandstreaming.org/less, or point your camera phone at the screen and give us some ideas, basically, and we're going to pick the best ones and talk about them in European Parliament in June. So I hope that was a swift one. That's quite quick for me. I'll stop there.
It was, and I was going to. So my first question was, you kind of very briefly touched upon it, but so I think you kind of soft launched this at the very beginning of the year. It's been a few months now. What's been some of the initial reaction, to with some of the stakeholders and people that you've
really warm, actually, really warm, and I've been buoyed up by the fact that all sorts of groups have gone, oh, we can actually participate in this. And so at the moment it's more framed as expressions of interest, and we're working hard and quickly to create a more defined scoping document. We did purposefully start with a very blank canvas, a comments box, but as people are starting to hone in on the space, refined, I think, by thinking about streaming, they want a little bit more definition, and we are thinking codec implementation as a sort of core backbone sort of space to think about. But it has ramifications on bandwidth, it has ramifications on caching supply, and so on and so forth. So we're trying not to prescribe too much. We just want to hear if somebody's got a great idea, if it's to move everything to multicast ABR because it just works, then let's hear that. But we want to hear all the ideas and have a chance as a group to review which we think we can collectively stand up tests to really explore.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, I'll follow up with the codec side and some of the maybe some more technical side a bit later on. But Mahini, kind of similar to the first question, what were your thoughts on when you saw the lesser chord, and what's the reaction from some of your member broadcasters about what Greening and Streaming are trying to do?
So the members, not everybody knows about it, unfortunately, but there are a few that have been in touch with Greening of Streaming through various means, particularly our UK-based members. And then there's Arte that you already saw on the page that Dom shared. So yeah, I think the idea that organizations have a sustainability strategy, and at some point, what happens up at the top is going to start filtering down as a culture change into what's happening in all parts of the organization. We know the tech side, whether it's streaming, cloud production, post-production, now all done on tech. We know that's our biggest area that we need to look at, because there have been various numbers on how big the tech industry's carbon emissions are, and at some point it was even going up to some articles say 4%, which is basically the same as the aviation industry was pre-COVID. So yeah, with COVID and more streaming done, it's something we know that we have to be responsible for and start to look for help on, because as you said, it's not something we can do on our own, particularly with digital streaming. There's just so many different organizations involved. It's so fragmented, and you can't, it's like the rest of your supply chain. It's your supply, it's your scope 3. So if you're looking at scope 3 with other suppliers in procurement and production, works exactly the same way with tech. And so I know that our members are wanting to do this in technology. I mean, we have a whole raft of other things that we do, like virtual productions and archiving, etc. So streaming is not just the only part that we have to look at. We have to look at it in a holistic format. And the idea is that we need to start measuring, because now we're at that point where people know that we need to be greener and more sustainable in the way we do our work in the technology, but how to get started. And I think that's where the difficulties occur. Like when you're on your own in your organization, you realize you have all these other parts, all these other organizations. Where do we start? So we know that we have to come together and start in places like greening of streaming, like where some of our members have worked with academia and other areas to do their distribution challenges, and looking at the distribution carbon emissions that were done through the different distribution methods, etc. So it's something that we really do have to look at. But we have the other side, which is if we have the technologists and the sustainable technologists to look after, but we also then have the content creators, which are the other part of the puzzle as well, which also need to be satisfied. So yeah, there's a lot of juggling going around, and I don't have the answers today, but we are getting started in order to start looking at these issues.
Well, I guess, that's one of the, I won't call it a problem, but a challenge. The fact that, as you say, this is such a big issue that pretty much impacts the whole chain, right? From, the camera production, whether it's virtual or not, all the way down, the CDNs, etc., to the end user devices, which we're going to talk about in more detail. So I was going to ask, how does the lesser code and what greening and streaming are trying to achieve fit in with the EBU's, wider alignment with sustainability? Hopefully, do you think it can be a big help of what they're trying to achieve?
Yes, it aligns, and then that's hence why we're a member of greening of streaming. But yes, we are looking around, and we want to be part of the conversation and help as part of that conversation to make sure at the end of the day it's some of our members' content that's going through this chain. So it's super important for us, and we have to align, yes, whether it's with greening of streaming, other various other organizations that exist out there as well. Okay,
Ian, my first kind of thought when I heard this and I knew that you were in a panel, was 4K HDR and 8K have had enough kind of trouble gaining momentum in the industry for cost and other reasons. And now we have this other factor thrown into the mix, which complicates the picture somewhat. What's your kind of thoughts on this?
I don't think sustainability has been sort of a drag on Ultra HD, 4K, HDR, etc. I think that it's had its own challenges in other respects, actually, over the last few years. Trying to drive that as a premium enhanced content format for premium content. There are many reasons why it doesn't necessarily come top of the consumer's desire or wish list, although it does do in many respects, although in some they buy the numbers, i.e. they buy the 4K, but get the HDR and the content quality. But in terms of now, what does it mean to 4K HDR now? I think the focus on sustainability is about still making sure we do things in a responsible way and a sustainable way. And for many years, we've always been looking at energy usage as a cost factor. It hasn't always been as big as it maybe is focused on now, particularly as well because of energy costs overall. but it's always been a factor. It's just how much importance we put on it. And actually, the other honest fact is that many device manufacturers, service providers never thought about the consumer energy usage whatsoever. They only thought about their own energy uses, their direct costs, whereas they therefore prioritize and optimize their own direct costs, but not necessarily what the consumer has. But that's where the EU has spent a lot of time, actually, like the last 18 years or so of discussion and regulations and directives to actually reduce and make more intelligent use of energy in devices. And that's an important thing to stress, is that it's not new. It's been there for a while. What is new is trying to take a more holistic viewpoint of it all. And HDR and 4K, I can take my own personal view. And I can actually take a forum view. The Ultra HD forum has always said that the resolution isn't the key factor of enhanced next generation content. The forum is almost unique amongst all the organizations and SDOs who point out that 1080p is a perfectly acceptable resolution for content. The other factors that have to be also applied to improve the experience for the consumer and give the premium experience. It just so happens that 4K is there as well. So HDR is very, very important and key. Next generation audio is very important and key. To a lesser extent, higher frame rate is key. But resolution, it can be important, but it's not that important always.
Okay. I've been at conferences recently, and I'm sure I've actually seen you at least at one of them, where UHD HDR has got a bad reputation. People opening a panel, kind of slagging it off, right? So,
yeah.
So you don't think that's so? I mean,
that's some of the factors.
Is HDR not good for the environment? I mean,
well, HDR is about making more realistic and better looking pictures in itself. And it's tied with wide color gamut. And wide color gamut itself is not really an additional energy driver. The high dynamic range can be. It all depends on the implementation of how you display the content, what your TV is doing predominantly. HDR itself is not really a factor of the energy usage of the whole transmission chain because it's just bits. It's the same bits, it's just different numbers of bits. And so therefore, it's really then what you do with those bits when it gets to the end of the delivery, and maybe some of the processing along the way, but primarily about what it happens when it gets displayed on the screen. That's where I believe, personally, the focus is basically what does a television do in response to a HDR signal? And actually, importantly, what does a television do in response to a standard dynamic range signal and a HD resolution signal and a 4K resolution signal? And is there actually any difference in amongst all of those? And that's where we get to television implementation technologies. And that gets very interesting because in some respects, many of the factors that we want to try and do, maybe of reducing resolution usage, don't necessarily have an impact to what actually gets displayed. The TV's native resolution is 4K. It's 4K. It displays at 4K. It never displays a 1080p image in 1080p. It displays 1080p pixel doubled to 4K. So if the TV is still doing the same job, even if you sent an SD picture to it, it's still got to upconvert it to 4K. And actually the set-top boxes also generally upconvert it themselves. So actually they don't need the television necessarily to do in that upconversion. So if you vary the resolution of the content, are you going to have an impact? No, not with today's configurations and displays the way they are today, because they get it to the highest resolution that display can support as quickly as they possibly can. Same with dynamic range. There's an interesting noteworthy thing about HDR content. Most set-top boxes today will actually upconvert to HDR no matter what you provide to them. There are various problems with that and challenges from a quality perspective, but that's what happens. You buy an Apple TV today, if you deliver a standard definition picture to an Apple TV, it will display it 4K in HDR, regardless of what you do, unless you make that change in the configuration of the device to stop it doing that. And that's probably a discussion point to be had with device manufacturers about that. And then the display capability, there are some challenges with the technologies used by transmissive displays, you know, LCD, LED based televisions today that generate the light level regardless of what's actually on screen. They turn the backlight on full blast. They may segment it using local dimming, but in the end, each of those local dimming zones, the moment it has a single pixel in them, turns on the backlight as bright as it possibly can if it has to display a HDR signal. And that's a design and implementation challenge around displays. It doesn't happen with other types of displays, but it happens certainly with the vast majority in that way. And that's a discussion point to be had. And I think that's what the EU were driving at with the recent regulations. They want manufacturers to make more efficient implementations of display screens, full stop. Because we're talking here about the 60 to 350 watts of energy usage in use. And that's probably the largest single use of energy in the entire chain, especially when you multiply it by every single viewer. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, fair enough. And I mean, so I'll ask Dom. So Dom, do you agree? And do you think that people who give UHD, HDR a hard time, are they necessarily wrong?
So Ian will be pleased to know that Ian will be pleased to know I'm in violent agreement. To a streamer, I don't really care about resolution or bitrate or codec or anything. They are implementation details in terms of distribution at scale. They're what happens at the edge of the end device. So there's everything to play for in terms of delivering something to that edge device, which we know can be rendered energy efficiently. Only things I think I'd vary from what Ian was sort of specifically talking to. I think I disagree. I don't think we have anything like enough information at this stage to say that the consumer device is where all the energy is burnt. My smart TVs are whatever. My anecdote that I've done with my meter is 75 watts for the EPG, 85 watts to decode OTA or SD streaming, 135 watts to decode HDR, largely because that's done in software, not DSPs. And that's an implementation sort of reason as far as I can work out. So there's, there's something to play for in that implementation. But the question I think that the lesser chord asks is if we put something out that every manufacturer just made sure they supported in the DSP, whether it was, 8K, HDR, but it was done in the DSP at 3 watts rather than 30 watts in software or whatever it is, that's an order of magnitude saving that we can have by default. The fact that those chips will support other things in software and let consumers opt into these other qualitative things is still very much something we consider what we call gold button services. They require an interaction, but they're there so that you can watch the game in UHD, or you can watch the Lord of the Rings in HDR or whatever, with the family or whatever it may be. But in the same way, the analogy I use is in the same way I don't have a stream of boiling water running into my sink all the time. I boil a kettle when I want a coffee. If we deliver the mechanics in an energy efficient way, we can still give the consumer choice. It's the internet, damn it, we can do anything. We can still give the consumer the choice, but we shouldn't by default be pushing everything up onto the newest technology, which is only supported in software, which is energy inefficient as part of the sales proposition. What we should do is say, look, be aware that if you use this, it's going to put 5p an hour on your electricity bill. It's going to be heavy duty. Be aware of this, get some consumer awareness going as we let them have that choice, but don't push it to them just to effectively, I wanted to use a coarse comment, I'm going to try and rephrase it, effectively outbid the other people that we're selling against, and I think the industry, it comes back to this problem of oversell. All these new capabilities that Ian's talking about are innovation. They help the industry develop in many ways. And once 8K is the de rigueur standard and it's in the DSPs and we've worked out how to scale the networks to deliver the bandwidth, that's fine, as long as those networks then become 10 times more energy efficient over time because of that consolidation. That will help. And the lesser chord is trying to leverage some consolidation within the industry to get an economy of scale around something energy efficient. as a starting point, and then go back out and innovate. But at the moment, everything we're doing is having no effect because it's just disjointed and it's all over the place.
I would actually say I agree, but there's an interesting point there. Most televisions don't implement these things in software. In fact, pretty much all. In fact, newer codecs are being looked at in software, and I would agree that I would be I have a very strong view about software decode. I think the entire industry has. I think every individual here has. If you've got a mobile phone that goes flat 4 times to 20 times faster because they are delivering the content in a software in an implementation that's decoded in software on the device, then 100%. Yes, that's a bad technology. It can be used maybe for early adoption and prototyping, but I wouldn't do mass scale at software. And I don't believe today any TV manufacturer does that, or a device manufacturer does that. They implement largely in hardware. And in terms of the testing I've done with clients and very recently, we see generally only a 0.4 watt variation for different resolutions and types of content. Compared to the lowest resolution and SDR going all the way up to 4K in HDR. The actual energy usage of the decode itself is very, very relatively minor. And the bulk of the energy is actually in the light generation for the back panel of the display, whether it's a 5-inch display on a mobile phone or whether it's a 55-inch or an 85-inch television display. And then it's about the efficiency of that display more than anything else. But the decode's really interesting and important. And I think we've got to make sure that they always include sustainability in the decisions about deployment of services at scale. And I think we'd look here at what do we call them now, FANGs, or what are they referenced now? Those companies are doing a lot of work with software-based decoding, are trying to move to scale. And I would question that personally about whether that's really a good idea at this time. I'd also be querying any solution that implements a lot of decode or any type of processing in software at scale, because that's why we said back in 2014, 2015, that it will be all better when we've got HEVC in the hardware. It will be able to deploy proper services. We'll be able to do it at scale and not as a trial or as a pilot. And I think that's about good engineering design. Blast it. That's all I'll say. It's about good engineering design.
Yeah. So I've heard FANGs, Gaffer Mafia. There's kind of all kinds of different acronyms for them. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the devil is in the detail, and as you guys have shown, and we could probably talk about that for a while, but maybe taking a slightly higher level, I'm interested in hearing from Hemini. So my kind of original question really stands is, with broadcasters really trying to make that transition, even to HD, let alone UHD, but that they are. How do you balance the trade-off between now sustainability and selling that quality to the consumer?
So again, we don't have a solution for this, because the idea is that the audiences are buying their television sets, their devices, to be able to watch whatever content it is in a certain way, whether it's HD, UHD, etc. But what we do have to make sure is that we are doing it in a responsible way. And the idea is still, so there's part of it which a lot of studies that are already out there agree with Ian, in the sense that the bulk of the distribution energy is used at the end in the end user devices, whether it's the television or the home router, home boxes, etc., That's what some studies are already showing. But there's the other side of it, which is some part of it, which Ian mentioned, the idea of going through that chain, even though bulk of it may happen on the end user device, that chain is still our responsibility, and for broadcasters, because their content is going through this. And it's the idea of using, whether you use a courier to get from your letter from A to B, or whether you use a van to get it from A to B. So the idea is that there is still these small changes that we can make, which on its own probably doesn't have much of the bulk of the changes. But the idea is that imagine this happening over millions of times or billions of times, and that's where it changes. So AI, for example, the big, the massive algorithms, etc., models aren't the ones that are actually the worst part in the whole AI chain. The problem is all of us doing our little Google searches on a constant basis, and that's the bulk of the carbon emissions that are coming out of when you look at like the idea of Google and AI. So there are things that we need to do on which may be very minute in the whole chain of things, but done over a number of times makes a difference. Okay,
and I just have one question I really want to ask you. When one of my writers spoke to you before ABC, you said the EBU, one of the working groups, was looking to develop matrix around cloud and streaming as pertains to this area, but it proved a lot harder than you thought it would be. What's kind of the main problem there, and have things improved in the last 6 months on that front when it comes to that kind of matrix and data?
We're still trying to get there. So we don't have the metrics. Yes, some data cloud services providers have given data out, but it's all being taken with a pinch of salt. So if I'm using a particular CDN or cloud provider to do some distribution as a European broadcaster, typically, yes, the gateways are going to be in Europe and North America, with a small percentage elsewhere. Let's just say that. But even then, when you tell me that you've managed to get 90-something% plus green energy, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it, because there's just not enough green energy in the world to be able to do that. There is no way they have sourced 100% green energy in order for me to have that 94% green energy to say, well, it's fine, because when people are streaming my program X, I know that 94 out of every 100, 94 are using it through green energy. There is still lots of myths that we have to go through, and actually that makes it a lot harder, because when we get to it, people just think, oh well, this exists, and it's a lot of noise because we're not getting down to the actual nitty-gritty. So that yeah, it still keeps me up. We are trying. Part of it is the way technology has just moved on, and there'll be several contracts one organization has with the same service provider. There'll be various pieces of data that are used here, there, and everywhere. Everybody's doing storage, everybody's doing this. And to get our head around all of that at the moment, even just to figure out how much data we're using just for storage and nothing else, is proving difficult.
Okay. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to throw one open question to everyone, and then I'll see if there's any Q&As from the audience. I've seen a couple of studies that kind of try to compare how green DTT is to satellite cable, streaming, all that. Is that like comparing apples to oranges, or is it actually a meaningful kind of debate to have? And that's for anyone who wants to take that on.
Can I be controversial?
Well, yeah.
Customers define how they consume their content and what they use to consume it in many respects, and they are the ones leading the change in what we're doing, and they're leading towards on-demand content. You are never going to deliver on-demand content via a one-way broadcast path. That's just the way this is real world, real life. We have to make however they use it as efficient as possible and as effective as possible, and as sustainable as possible. And I don't think we're ever going to get into the situation where we can tell somebody, I'm sorry, no, you can't play back that catch-up asset that of your soap that you want to watch, because it's not very efficient. We can give customers choices and tell them and communicate to them what it means to use an on-demand service. We can help them make that more efficient, but we can't tell them not to do it.
I'd speak in support of that. And I've only ever worked, just to pick up on the detail there, I don't see the internet as being on demand. I've only
No.
ever worked with live streaming, so I think that, but the internet has its live linear programming, if you like. It also has millions and millions and millions of video conferences going on at any one time, and all sorts of narrowcasts which are specific to audiences. The OTA will deliver BBC One if that's what people want to watch, or it'll deliver whatever gets onto the UHF muxes, and it's really efficient for doing that, and it's great at doing that. It's a completely different thing.
However, it will become at some point not as efficient as delivering a unitary stream.
I think
And that's the
supporting two
interesting point.
networks, there's no point in supporting two networks to do the same thing. If one of them's doing 1 billion events a day and the other ones can do 16 channels in a country, then just that's a waste of energy. So I think eventually commoditization around specific, interoperable technologies, the internet, will mean that broadcast industry will make sure all its kit talks internet and will decommission anything that's on a weird network.
I always use an analogy which people probably understand better, and that is the point at which electric cars dominate is not when actually they stop making petrol engine cars. It's when the cost of distributing and selling petrol to petrol stations becomes cost ineffective. And that's the thing about broadcast. It's in the position of the petrol stations. There's going to be a point where large scale broadcast is not going to be it's going to use more energy than providing the unicast stream. Simple as that. Simply because of the fact there's less users. The efficiency of a broadcast stream is based upon the number of users. When you have less users, it will actually be less efficient.
Do you think things like there's a lot of work going on from SVA, especially around kind of open caching and deep caching, all that? Does that help in help make streaming greener? Or I'm obviously not a technologist, but
I'm in the middle of doing a really deep slide deck about areas where streaming does and doesn't make a difference, and traffic doesn't make a difference. I've just been doing the slide on CDN caching, and it's quite interesting because the question I'm asking as I'm going through this review is, what does no traffic do to the energy compared with what does all the traffic do to the energy? In the network, it doesn't make any difference because the network is scaled for capacity, not by traffic. The CDN ostensibly does have some dynamicism in how much it might want to cache and so on. And potentially could make its caches elastic, but they tend not to be like that. They just tend to be a bin, which is a last in, first out system, and it's full to the brim all the time. So not populating them with 8K content might make the refresh rate different, but it won't change the amount of storage and the amount of energy to provide that storage. So they may then choose to increase capacity so that more content can, because the 8K is potentially taking up more space, that decision may lead to enlarging caches, but you don't shrink them again once you've enlarged them. Nobody's turning anything off. Telecoms doesn't turn anything off. They sell empty availability as an increased SLA to someone else. So there's economic forces which are much stronger than engineering forces which are at play. And we're trying to work out where, one of the key things to work out is where those touch points are, and whether we can really make the networks elastic around their traffic rather than a static jump every time we increase capacity.
And it's also, sorry, I was going to say that it's also about, even within the local home distribution, when I don't use my internet, I'm using 10 watts. When I'm using it at full speed, it's 12 watts. The incremental attribution is very hard to determine how to actually attribute that to any particular one service. And that's our problem, which actually Hemini referred to. We've turned over the stone of sustainability and seen it's incredibly complicated, way more complicated than any of us really truly understand. And one small change in one part of the system may not actually have a positive effect. It may have a negative effect without us understanding it. The law of unforeseen consequences are huge here.
Right. Kind of to the previous point, but a bit broader, I have a comment/question from Barbara. Wouldn't standards just help make everything be more efficient? The market will choose how to deliver content, but broadcasters and streamers using standards would be more efficient. I guess question about standards.
Over time, over time, commoditization around standards definitely brings prices down, tends to increase supply, and also it's a good way to focus demand as well. So it tends to benefit markets having standardization. The only problem is, and this is possibly a question to everyone else on the panel, there's a lot of people are saying that perfect is the don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I keep hearing that phrase at the moment around sustainability arguments, and I've been really sucking my tooth about it, because there's the data attribution model itself has raced out, and it's a great way to create feedback for people who use the shared infrastructure of these standards-based systems and so on to feel responsible for their use of it. And it created a feedback loop, and it's created a relationship, a sense of relationship between how many gigabytes you send and receive over a network and your energy and your carbon, and that's becoming an accounting standard. But it's only a model. It's only an idea of what's happening. Reducing your usage doesn't save any energy. And so actually in that case, we've now got an entrenchment with a lot of people who are thinking that reducing data saves energy. And we're not at the point where the data is where the real information is available to make the perfect decision. And the problem with goods being as perfect being the enemy of good, or whatever the saying is we've become entrenched in a way of thinking, and now we've got two problems. We've got to get everyone thinking about the right thing, and we've got to stop people who think they're thinking about the right thing and are already some way down the path in doing something, and bring them back down that path and channel them in a different direction. So I sort of put it to everyone. I'm not sure that perfect is the enemy of good. I think sometimes we might need to sit and actually get it right, and then deploy the right thing. And I think there's quite a lot of experimentalism going on at the moment, but it's justifying in little silos. It's not working together cohesively to a focused end.
And to me, standards in themselves don't necessarily help. What helps is good engineering design. Standards, whether it's de facto or defined, allow you to scale the adoption of good engineering design.
Yeah.
I think good engineering, we have to think, this is it. I've been involved in a TV platform, thankfully 4 years ago. It had a standby mode on its set-top box where it used more energy than when it was not in standby.
Dimmed the red light, right?
No, actually, it was the graphics decode of a black screen that it was presenting over the SCART to the television that increased the energy usage.
Oh,
Yes. So believe me, there's scary stuff. We just didn't think about it because, after all, the customer paid for the electricity. We didn't. You just got to include it as a variable. And once you do that and you make that commitment, then you include it in your good engineering design to produce the optimum result. And going back to what Dom said, optimum is not perfect. Optimum is not necessarily good. Optimum has to be defined as you are trying to deliver what you're going to deliver. You got to understand what is the solution that's optimum for what you're doing.
Mm. Well, engineers sometimes tell me that, that broadcast or just the engineering in general is about compromises. And I think what you guys are trying to do also has to involve a compromise, because of the different stakeholders and fraud issues being discussed. So just to round up one for everyone, just looking forward, Dom, what's next? What do you expect to happen, hope to happen? What's next with the Accord? And realistically,
we've got about I think 9 or 10 sort of expressions of interest so far. I'm hoping to sort of turn that to 50 or 60 by the end of May, when we'll sit down and actually gather them and sift through them as with the members, shortlist them to 4. Then we're having our sort of twin day with the on this platform, actually, with the Media Tech Sustainability Summit, which we're both contributing to, and day 2 is going to be a chance to take part in and look at that workshop as it happens, hopefully in one of the EU debating chambers, with our members, to sit down and go, okay, this is a good idea. We think we can create a test. Let's all kind of come together, straw man it a little bit, and then spend the summer designing those tests, present them at IBC, and hopefully run some really interesting tests see if we can make any differences to any needles, and make sure before we start that everyone agrees that the needles that we're going to try and move are real needles and things that they'll respond to if we do move them. So we've got to try and corral people to move forward in a direction this year. That's the plan, and we'll see where we get to. We'll see where we get to. I'm sure you'll see more of them.
Yep. Hemini, what's next with the EBU in terms of some of the sustainability work?
So we've got our own sustainability summit happening on the 4th of April, and that covers a wide variety of areas that broadcasters are part of. But part of it does include, we have a session on green production, which is looking at virtual production sets and how to reduce travel. And the other side is that we also have a tech session, which is looking at streaming and how do we make an environmental impact on streaming. And then aside from that, we're still trying to figure out how to do the metrics on the cloud, and obviously part of the streaming chain and the distribution methods that we still currently have to work with, regardless of where the audiences are going. But there are still certain audiences that are around, so on different methods. So we're looking at those too.
Pesky data and matrix. I gather that from everyone involved in this area. They always complain about data and matrix. We everyone agrees we have to do something, but kind of doing something is hard because of those kind of things. So yeah, I all I can do is wish you luck with that. And maybe Ian, can you talk on behalf of the UHD forum at all?
Well, I'll do two. I'll do one from me and I'll do one from the forum. One will be exciting, maybe. One will be quite boring, I'm sure. From my own personal perspective, I continue to work with clients where sustainability is a product feature. And one of the key product features is to switch to simpler devices that are based on single networks that utilize anything between 25 and 80% less energy than the devices that are currently in people's homes, pretty much. And balancing that against where the energy usage has to move from that client through to the back end. That's on my own personal perspective. On the forum side, we are considering sustainability and what it means to Ultra HD. That's probably the most official and straightforward, boring answer you can get right now.
Anything in NAB or IBC to flag, or is it too early, especially for IBC, but maybe NAB, anything, or... we'll leave that for another time. You know what? I've already overrun. I've got millions of other questions. We could talk for hours, but I know Neil's kind of
Thank you,
heard you guys.
Thank you.
Heard you guys. Neil, I'll leave it with you.
So much. Thanks so much, all of you. We really appreciate the time. Yes, we've, as always, run massively over and could be talking for, this could be a week-long session here. But I know, Hemini, you've got to go. I know, Dom, you've got a bit of a hard stop coming up. But I would invite everybody to just stick around for a little bit longer if you can. Hemini, please feel free to go. I know you've got to go and it's getting late there. I'm sure Ian, Dom, Goran, if you could
20 minutes or so.
A couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions, please make the most of the platform that we have. Yes, and a big shout out to Barbara. I know you're involved in the Tech Media Sustainability Summit coming up in June. So if you want to speak to Barbara about that, that would be great as well. Karen, did you want to just do a quick revisit of the environment, just to remind people how to do it? And
Yep. So speakers, I guess you're going to go into your designated rooms. Each one has their own room. So if you have a question or want to continue the conversation, just go in. Again, you can just click on the name of the room, or you can click on it on the map, and you'll get a leave and join and go.
Yep. Thank you all for attending. I'm going to make myself scarce and I'm going to do a tour of the rooms as well. And thank you all to our panelists, and thanks everyone for turning up. Take your questions with you into the rooms. Ian, Dom, Goran might give us a few minutes. Hemini, thank you so much. Have a great evening. And we'll stop recording. It's all off the record now, guys. Say what you like. Thanks very much.